All right. Shall I go ahead and start, Tiffany?
Yeah, you're good to go.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is the speaker series number 2 today. And if you haven't had a chance yet, please make sure that you sign in using our codes. There are QR codes there that are on the screen. All right. But first of all, we'll have a couple of announcements. I want to go ahead and just mention to anyone that's attending, next week we are having a mentorship event, and it's actually sort of an event to help those who want to be mentors to look into mentorship. And it's basically just a mentorship 101 session. And it's based on the book. We will be sending out information, but we also have a group of folks that specifically were interested in being mentors. So we are going to send that out. But we just wanted to open it up to those that are attending today, just to make you aware of that event happening next week. Also, there's a CalSHRM case competition coming up. And I'm not as familiar, but if Diana or Tiffany can speak to this, I don't know if you guys are.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can speak a little bit on this. I know it's a lot of information all at once. So just to give everyone a quick update, this is the event that Michelle and I competed in last year for the first time for USC. I know they've been hosting this competition for, I want to say about 7 years or so, just under 10 years, I think. And so there was an announcement at Saturday's CalSHRM social that this is the current timeline for this coming year's CalSHRM case competition. The biggest update is that there is no location finalized yet. So that detail is yet to come, but I wanted to share the dates in case anyone was interested in competing next year, to go ahead and save the date on your calendars for April 20th through the 21st. That will be the weekend of the competition. And registration is actually opening up quite soon on December 5th. So definitely, if it's something that you're thinking about, please make sure to reach out to our team. So probably around December is when we will start taking names and figuring out teams. Hopefully by December, they will give us a location update, and that will also help us budget out for any possible expenses if we do need to end up traveling, if it's not local. And then the rest of the dates are just kind of an idea of what competing looks like. So hopefully by December, we will start recruiting teams to send, and then we need to make sure that we register with CalSHRM, and then there is the deadline by April 2nd. Of course, we're going to want to register before that if we're going to actually travel. And then we have some deadlines for our team captains, and April 15th is when the case study is actually sent out to students. So you can see it's a very short timeline between April 15th and the competition on the 20th. So typically the deadline to submit materials will be the day before, so the 19th. So definitely you get pretty much a short week to read the case and put together a presentation and executive summary. So that deadline will be on the 20th at 5 p.m. So definitely, if you are interested in competing, please feel free to reach out to me or Michelle, so we can share some of our experiences with you. And definitely make sure you get these dates on your calendar, because it really is time consuming between work and school, and then having to budget time for this the week that the case comes out. So for sure, if you're interested, please reach out or ask any questions. Happy to share some experiences.
Thank you, Tiffany. All right. And if you don't already do so, please follow us. We're actually on LinkedIn as well as Instagram. Okay, so we're going to do another photo. So Chelsea, let us go.
I
Okay.
think this time we should stop sharing, so that way everyone will fit in the screen, right?
That makes sense.
Yeah, I totally messed it up last time. My bad.
Okay.
Okay. So everybody ready? Smile. Cindy, be careful. You're driving.
I
Okay.
know.
3, 2, 1. One more. 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Everyone looks
Yay.
great. Thank you.
All right. And now we will, hang on, hold on, bear with me here 1 second. There we go. All right. It is time to welcome Professor Ho. And I know that, Diana, you're a little more familiar with Professor Ho's background. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Well, all I know is that he's a great professor. I have not had the pleasure of having a class with you, Professor George, but I know that a lot of students have, and they love you.
Wow.
So we're very blessed and grateful that you're taking the time to present today with such an important topic. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And yeah, there's no better intro I think I could get than students like me. That's great. I mean, after that, it's all all the other accomplishments don't mean that much. But it's so great to be here with you. And thanks so much to the HRMA for having me here tonight. I'll do on my slide a little bit more about my background and share with you kind of my journey. But it's so exciting to be here with everybody and appreciate you taking time out of your busy days to hear a little bit about what I've been working on related to belonging. Can everyone see my slides okay? Okay, so yeah, just in case you were curious, I'm George Ho. I'll share my background in a second. I'm here to talk to you about belonging at work, the human and business imperative. This is sort of taken over as both a professional and a personal commitment for me, something I've been really excited to work on and share with you. And as we spend this hour together, I wanted you to have a better sense of who I am and how I got here. So, my name is George. I'm the co-founder of a company called Vital. We're focused on using technology to help inspire employees to build a culture of belonging, both for themselves and for others, and to really transform the way that people build culture instead of something that is often seen as a top-down initiative, to think about what everybody could do from the bottom up to contribute to culture and to make it feel like something that's doable and approachable. My journey before Vital was really that of a human capital consultant lately, both through my own firm, Greater Human Capital, and previously at Deloitte in their federal human capital practice, where I focused on technology, culture, and a bunch of other really cool stuff. A great firm to work for. And before that, I kind of, earned my stripes, so to speak, as a HR generalist in nonprofits. One of them was Share Our Strength, a nonprofit focused on ending childhood hunger. And so this is where I kind of, learned my HR background and had a passion for HR. It took me a while. I switched into this career from a variety of other things that really were all over the place, from communications to being a paralegal. For me to find belonging professionally, it took an understanding that HR was out there and it was something that I could commit my career to. It's become something that has gone from my own personal exploration of where do I feel belonging at work to something now I've been trying to do more of for everybody through what I teach, but also what I do professionally at Vital. But of course, I love teaching at USC. It's been transformational for me. There on the right, you can see me at graduation. I did make it to California. I'm in San Francisco, the Bay Area tonight. I did make it to LA, but next time maybe I'll just be spiritually. But at least I'm usually in Washington, D.C. So to be out in California for this felt a little bit special and fitting. And I teach on a variety of topics: consulting, strategic HR, and most recently on belonging and inclusion at work. So here's how we'll spend the next hour. I'm bridging it down. I think we have about 45 minutes. So I've talked about myself a little bit. I'll set the stage. I'm going to introduce you to a little bit of the research I've done recently on belonging at work. I've spent about the last year interviewing both leaders, people managers, employees, as well as conducting a pretty extensive survey-based research on the topic, and I've got some findings that I think you'll hopefully find quite interesting and will inspire some questions. I'll share with you some practice ideas and we'll have a quick discussion. I think anytime that you can feel inspired to change one thing or do one small thing about belonging leaving this conversation, if I think there's something like, you know, a good dozen of us here, if all of us do one thing from this 45 minutes spent together to help someone else feel they belong or to improve our own sense of belonging, that's going to be time well spent. So I want to leave you with some practical tips of things you can do to make a difference in your life or other people's lives. I'll leave about 10 minutes for an AMA or an Ask Me Anything or a Q&A, whatever you want to call it, but your questions, any thoughts you may have, or requests for future research or anything like that, I want to make sure your voice shows up in today's conversation. All right, so I'll just jump right into it. So, you know, what is belonging at work? That is the question I'm sure if you're here today, you were a little bit curious about. You know, I'll start with the more textbook definition, but at a very high level, belonging is something that feels pretty abstract. And so, you know, we'll try to define it, but there's something inherently personal and unique about each person's experiences, about what they're going to believe belonging to mean to themselves, and that's totally okay. The idea is to start to deconstruct what drives it so that we can try to make those moments happen more frequently. But back to the technical definition, I think that may be helpful to anchor our conversation. Belonging is that way that we understand our place in a group. You know, we might use words like status or station to understand the value that others place on us and the strength of our relationships. And given how important our professional identities are, at least in the States, to our total holistic personal identities, how much you feel you belong at work has a big impact on your life. And it's something that even with that reality or that truth, it's been difficult, you know, for people to put concrete terminology around and to start to do something about, both for themselves and the people they work with. So belonging, you know, it's not static, it's not binary, it's kind of happening all the time. It's moments of breakthroughs and tough moments, like I can imagine many are going on right now in the economy with layoffs and you know, fear of a recession. These moments are going to be happening all the time, whether that's above the surface in the explicit moments, the things that are like, you know, we experience, be that a microaggression or a microaffirmation that make us feel more or less feelings of belonging, or just our underlying assumptions about what's happening to us, around us. And it's that dynamic that makes belonging hard to pin down. It's not so easy to pull a lever and say, well, I belong now, or I don't belong now. It's this amalgamation of sort of minute by minute, second by second assumptions and biases you develop about your own status and your own station within a group. And it's happening across many different layers as well, right? We are all here out of a sense of shared belonging as HR professionals, but there may be those in our profession that struggle to feel belonging, right? And that's one reason they're here, to try to find new community, which is why one of the reasons HRMA is such a great group. They're creating community and belonging just by creating space. But it's important to note that employees it's not just static where you're going to feel it, oh, I belong, you know, to this organization. There's a sense of belonging to a team, to a organization, to a division or a department, to an industry, to a greater business community. And so remember, there are things that you can do that will span beyond simply what you do within the constraints of a team or an organizational environment. You can affect belonging in a much broader way just by reaching out and creating community, like many of you are doing here already. And, you know, why does belonging matter? We'll talk about that in more detail shortly, but it's the foundation for the deeper work and deeper relationships. It's very difficult without that common understanding. We all belong here, right? No matter what our differences of opinion are, no matter what our different lived experiences are, but we have the status here to disagree, to work through things, and to take the risk together of disagreeing, solving problems collaboratively and being inclusive, without the fear of reprisal, without the fear that you'll be othered, is basically the opposite terminology of belonging, right? When you're in a position where you take a risk and you feel ostracized or a sense of reprisal for it, you will feel othered, pushed out of that group, right? Easier terminology, the in crowd, the out crowd. if you feel like you're being pushed into the out crowd, that is something that will make doing things like resolving our differences and solving problems together much harder. You know, if you fear every time you take an action, or you do something wrong, you'll be pushed out. People don't take risks. And that's one of the biggest problems in broader diversity, equity, and inclusion work. It represents real risk to change the way we work. And if you don't feel belonging, you don't take risks like that. And then lastly, belonging is hard. It's not something that most people are ever equipped to talk about at work. And if I soft poll the room, you can use an emoji if you'd like, or just, you know, come off mute and say what's on your mind as well. You know, think about it yourself. In your career, did anybody ever talk to you about, well, hey, welcome to your career. So let's talk about your feelings of belonging here. And here's the language to use. Here's the frameworks to think about it. And hey, now maybe you're moving up in the world. You have teammates around you. You have people you're managing. Did anybody ever say, hey, well, this is how you build belonging for people around you? It hasn't been so explicit, you know, and I think even though it's been around for a long time, if you go back to, you know, Maslow's hierarchy, he's definitely talking about belonging even 50, 60 years ago. But at the same time, it's something that it's hard, and we often aren't given the resources, the language to do something about it ourselves. We do a lot of things inherently without knowing, maybe explicitly they're about belonging. We try to create belonging for people. We don't necessarily call it that. We might say, hey, we're trying to create a welcoming team environment. We're trying to, you know, do some things that help people feel connected to us. But belonging in an explicit way that's grounded in the different areas that drive it are not something that people are equipped to talk about every day. And especially with things like remote work entering the equation, hybrid work, these add new layers of which require more planning and dedication and intentionality. And I think that's the atmosphere we're entering into in terms of, you know, what's going on with belonging at work. And I think that's the next question you're probably curious about. Well, what's going on? You're talking about belonging. What's happening right here? And let me just pause. I see some things coming in the chat. Oh, okay, great. Awesome. Cool. What's the state of belonging at work? This is from research that I conducted as part of my work with Vital. And we surveyed 1,300 US-based professionals that were full-time. We did dozens of interviews with business leaders, HR leaders, people managers, and employees. And we put this data set together into a report. And I'm just going to highlight some of the key stats from that report. Of course, if you'd like to download it or learn more, just reach out to me or the HRMA. I'm sure they'll be glad to share it with you. But a few things that I think it's really important to know about the state of belonging right now across the US landscape. And this is based on our research, of course, but you know, we feel confident in the conclusions that it's helping us draw, which is that about half of employees are not feeling confident that they belong at work. That to me is a pretty astounding number. And I believe it from the conversations I've had, from the people I've talked to, and my own experiences, that this number, you know, makes sense to me, but to see that reflected in a large data set was pretty surprising. And I think that's something that we can all work on. We can all make progress in, and we'll talk more about how we get there, but that should be that North Star number. I'd love to see that number go down and down until it's, you know, completely gone. If you're thinking about what I would say, you know, my personal mission is anchored to, it's like getting rid of that group. I want everybody to feel confident that they belong at work and that they can take the risks that are necessary to really work differently together. We looked at and created a measure, an index to measure belonging. We call it the ARC model. I'll describe it for everybody in a moment. The average score that we got across our data set, which is about the same as the median, was 79 out of 100, which doesn't sound that bad in some sense, but when you think about it, you know, from an academic sense, that's a C. And so, you know, this is something where we'd really like, you know, I was really curious to see kind of what was driving that. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about how we created this score and index in a moment. About 2/3 of employees say they have to try hard to belong at work. To me, that's, you know, that also feels right. You know, that there's a big portion of the population where this doesn't come naturally. I've had conversations with people that have told me it's taken them 20 years to find belonging at work. and they've had to go through industries, through organizations to finally find that feeling. And again, that's the kind of stuff that motivates me to say, what can we do to shorten that curve for everybody, at least to make, so that they don't have to try quite as hard to feel belonging. That's so important to motivation. That's so important to us as people. And then employee net promoter score on the right-hand side, you can see that is a sort of North Star metric in employee engagement. If you might be familiar with the term of net promoter score, essentially scores, at a high level, the strength that people feel or the affinity that people feel towards your brand as an employer. And it's scored on a scale from -100 to 100. And so the difference is for those employees that feel they belong is their average employee net promoter score is +46. So almost +100 is the highest score. And for those that don't belong, it's -10. So it's a huge difference, right? And that makes sense logically, right? That if you do feel belonging, you tend to really have a much stronger affinity towards a brand. Whereas if you don't belong, you're much less confident and you have a much lesser degree of affinity towards that brand. And then the last point, and I saw a question come through, so I definitely want to hear that. But 98% of employees say they reflected on their sense of belonging, with the majority doing so daily or weekly. And I think that's another really important thing. This is not something that rarely comes into our minds. Most people think about their belonging at work, whether it's explicit, whether they use the same language that I'm talking about here, less so. But certainly when we asked employees in our study, most said they were thinking about it pretty often. I think some of that's the climate, some of that's the way that they're working, but it's just something that's come into focus for many employees, and they're asking themselves that during a time where there's a lot of turbulence in the labor market. Let me just pause there. I saw Tiffany, you had a question.
Yeah, I had a quick question about, and you might be going over this later, but I'm just curious. The things that stand out to me are the 45% rate and then the 79 out of 100. What kind of questions or factors are scored on using the ARC to get the 79 out of 100? Like, what are employees being asked to determine this score?
Tiffany, you couldn't have set me up better. Thank you. So let me answer that question using my next couple slides, and then as you have more clarifying questions, let's deep dive. But belonging is that abstract concept, and so we looked into figuring out what are the things that drive that feeling. So in our research, we ended up solidifying around these 3 pillars that create belonging. Of course, I'm the first to recognize that research is research. This doesn't mean that for everybody in every context, these are the only things that create belonging. It's much more complicated than that. But we tried to find things that had a strong correlation with improved feelings of belonging in our study. And we came up with this language, this idea of acceptance, being accepted for who you are without having to make harmful sacrifices, recognition, or being recognized for your unique contributions, not just the usual good job stuff, but really somebody appreciating your strengths, your uniqueness, your individuality, and then the C, connection, not just connected to each other socially, but through purpose, and a supportive bond that allows you to work together. And so we called this the ARC model. It's quite interesting, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, but it really does work like an ARC. Of course, some of it's we were hoping would be good marketing language, but it actually does work like an ARC, where in the first year, in terms of retention, in terms of positive belonging outcomes, acceptance matters the most. So we saw higher belonging outcomes in somebody's first year if their acceptance scores were higher. And essentially that reflects kind of what we might understand if we think about it from a narrative perspective. When you're first working somewhere, you strive to feel accepted. You want to make sure that people, are inviting you to be there, that they want you to be there. It's that acceptance that then makes the recognition you later receive more meaningful, and then helps you, kind of push and expand that network and series of connections that you have. But then after a year, recognition and connection start to matter much more than acceptance. You start to strive and care much more about if people see you, if you feel heard and appreciated, and if you feel like there are people you can rely on, friends or friendly relationships that help you be resilient through difficult moments in an organization. And so it's through this ARC model and a 20-item instrument that we started to measure belonging. And essentially what that means, if you're not familiar with that language, is that we created 20 questions that measure these 3 different elements. We tied them to existing previous academic studies that measure these ideas. And from that, we were able to come up with this index for, or these series of indices for workplace belonging. Just a little bit about the methodology for those that are still awake. But I wanted to define these in a little bit more detail for you. So acceptance, right? I think this is a little bit controversial. And I've heard mixed opinions about my own research, which is always interesting. That, I look at acceptance as the idea of harmful sacrifice. That, there's a lot of language out there about people being able to be their whole authentic selves. I actually like that language, and I think spiritually, to me, it's the right tone for people to take in the broader world of DEIB work. But I actually, the more I talked to people, the more I looked at the research and the more I thought about my own experiences, I've come to realize that there are aspects that people would prefer to choose not to bring into work. They don't want to have that be part of how they define their professional selves. And my argument is that as long as that's not a harmful sacrifice, that's acceptable. If that person sees that sacrifice as harmful, and in some cases you don't have a choice, right? You can't choose to ignore perhaps how you look or some visible measure of demographic diversity. But there are some elements you may not want to have to show up to at work. And it's when the sacrifice feels harmful to you to not talk about, to not integrate into yourself at work, your professional whole self, that your acceptance is challenged in a way that is very destructive. So some folks would push back on me, and I think that's totally fair, that any sacrifice is too much sacrifice about bringing yourself to work. I think it should be the person's own choice, whether they believe it's harmful or not. And of course, what does that mean to make that sacrifice? It means to code switch or to cover or to do those things that we know are very psychologically harmful for people. And if you haven't heard those terms before, it simply means changing your behavior to try to fit in better, or otherwise not talking about aspects of your being for fear of being othered. So, again, when those feel like harmful sacrifices you're making to do it that way, you can imagine what the opposite of acceptance, rejection, feels like to people. It's a pretty awful feeling. Recognition, not just the simple good jobs, but really the degree to which people feel seen and recognized for their individual contributions, and they see those contributions reflected in the greater purpose and goals. And then connection, right? You have to have the supportive bond with coworkers earned through shared experiences. And it's not just the social interactions, it's not just the team meetings or the procedural one-on-ones and things like that, but really shared experiences that demonstrate and recall a supportive bond between people. Let me just pause there around these 3 concepts to see if there's any questions or any reactions or any criticism so far. All right, I built in time for discussion too later, so I'm fine moving through and then coming back to questions as you have them. So one of the questions I get pretty frequently when I talk about belonging is, what's the difference between belonging, inclusion, and DEI or JEDI, or all the different terminology and acronyms that we use to try to quickly summarize a very broad and important set of work, but we just need quick language occasionally to recall a concept. And so, but at the same time, I think it's important to differentiate belonging, at least as I'm talking about it, from broader diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And I like to do this through the lens of looking at what do these bodies of work look like without belonging, and why, and how that might help you understand why they're separate ideas. So when I think about diversity, I think, we know that diversity drives innovation and long-term success, proven science as far as I'm concerned. But only if employees seek out different styles and perspectives. Otherwise, you get circumstances where you improve diversity, but the outcomes are bad for everybody. Nobody consults new and diverse perspectives, And so you have the same horrible business dynamics there, and you alienate people in the process. And we looked at it in our data set and we asked people a pretty important question. Do you seek out diverse opinions at work around your own work? And we found that when they didn't feel they belong, they didn't have that confidence. If you're in that 45% group that we talked about just earlier, you're 3 times less likely to seek diverse opinions than those that do belong. So the power of diversity, no matter what type of diversity you're talking about, is hindered significantly without feelings of belonging in place at an organization. Equity is another central pillar of this work, and equity, in my mind, in simple language, is about creating fair access to the things that help people be successful, both professionally through their reward systems, but also the ability to succeed at work. But you can create equitable systems with fair access, but if the behaviors and the culture don't align, right? There's systemic equity in your organization, but there's no cultural equity, right, or behavioral equity, then you run into the issue of creating opportunity, but having people who don't feel safe in claiming those opportunities. So you might say, well, we have an equitable pay system here, we have equitable promotion opportunities, and we've tried to create jobs or design jobs that have equity in mind in terms of how we reward them, or other opportunities in the organization to advance your profile. But if people don't feel they belong, they tend not to claim those opportunities and not feel set up for success. And so we found in our study, when employees don't feel they belong, they're 8 times less likely to feel set up for success. And again, like the numbers, I've more than triple checked. I feel like I've checked them 100 times now, because sometimes they seem a little bit on the crazy high side, but the data really suggests that it's that strong of a connection between something like I belong and I can succeed here. Those two thoughts are so linked, so strongly linked. And then lastly, inclusion, which is the one that often people confuse the most or conflate the most with belonging. Well, if you're all included and you feel included, then you belong. It's not. I don't know if I agree. I think I like to use an idea of imagining inclusion unrooted from belonging, where you're put into the room without the space or the standing to be heard or appreciated. And that would feel pretty awful, in my opinion. And so I think there's a lot of conversations I've had in the inclusion space. It's like, well, I'm very inclusive. I invite everybody to every meeting. It's like, it doesn't necessarily work that way. And when employees don't feel they belong, they're 10 times less likely to feel included. So you really can't fix inclusion or a lack of somebody's perspective of being included until you've also worked on their feelings of belonging. So I look at these as linked in a way that they cannot be separated, but I also look at belonging as something to work on, before you even, or to complement the work that you're doing in DEI. I don't see a world where the B is extra or a side. I look at it as the critical foundation for this work. And a couple other interesting data points I wanted to bring up, and then I want to move to discussion and more questions with the time we have left. But who's most responsible for belonging? So this is something we also asked in our study. And I was really shocked by this data. We're here, HR professionals, after work on a Monday, and you're going to look at the right and be like, what? In the study, and this shocked me really, was that we asked all of our respondents to say who's the most responsible for belonging. Only 2% said HR people teams. And I would have thought at least we would have been like 4th place out of these 5 options or something, but no, we're dead last after leaders, managers somewhere in the middle, and then themselves and coworkers. I thought this was one of the most fascinating things I had heard about this in the many interesting data points that I uncovered in the research that I did, at least interesting to me, was this one, and that employees understand inherently that belonging is something that starts from within and with themselves. It doesn't make it easier, but they do feel it's something that they take a large degree of responsibility for, and that they know that it's their direct coworkers and peers that also give them a strong sense of belonging. They're hoping that leaders and managers and HR people play a supporting role, but they know that culture essentially is driven by them and their colleagues. And that's a pretty interesting finding when you think about how do you implement programs from an HR perspective that match this understanding of how belonging happens. Right? If it's not HR driving it through your relationships, through your day-to-day work, how does it form, and how can you make sure it's happening, even if you're playing a supporting role, at least based in the eyes of employees? And then what's the business case? Again, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I kind of look at making a business case for belonging or DEI as sort of like having to make a business case for climate change. I think it's kind of settled science. We don't really need to debate whether or not it's good for business. But that being said, our counterparts in business deserve to hear these ideas and the rationale behind them communicated in language that's familiar with them. And so for those out there that need language to talk to the folks in business or broader business leadership about the relationship between belonging and engagement, here's some data from our study. Engagement, 10 times more likely to feel engaged, right? And from a business perspective, that's going to, breed higher productivity, more creativity, more innovation. People are much more likely to be engaged when they feel they belong. From a performance perspective, 50% more likely to see yourself as a strong performer if you feel you belong. In a world where perception is probably more than half the battle, you want people to feel like they can be a strong performer. They see themselves as one. And that is something where belonging provides people with that foundation. When you see yourself as a performer, you self-actualize more often as a performer. And that can lead to better performance and things like revenue growth and the things that come along with improved performance. And then lastly, the big one, at least for the last couple of years, though, the pendulum seems to be swinging in a different direction, retention. People that feel they belong are 6.5 times more likely to leave in less than a year without belonging. So if you're another way to express this risk is that about a third of voluntary turnover, at least based on our study, could be attributed to culture and belonging as a driver behind it. And so if you're seeing turnover of, call it for simple math, something like 12% a year or something like that, voluntary turnover, you can nix that by 4% by working on belonging, up to 4%. That would be the thought. And so anytime you reduce employee turnover costs, you reduce those costs, you get a better ROI on the investments you make in L&D and hiring and everything else that you put time into bringing people in. And so belonging has an incredibly strong business case across the board. So whether it's through this or you want to reach out to me and look at more specific data, I can't express enough that there's probably about 1,000 ways you could make a business case for belonging and inclusion as critical for your business's long-term sustainable success, and even in the short term, having a strong financial impact or mission impact if you're in government or nonprofits. All right, so I'm going to pause there just to see if there's any reflections or questions on anything so far. I have a couple more quick ideas, and then I want to at least pull the room in a brief discussion before we go to the broader Q&A and close out. But just pausing again, just give anyone a chance to ask questions or share a reflection. Ed?
Maybe this is another question teeing up a segue, but to the extent that you wanted, you, the head of HR, you, the president of the company, or whoever,
Sure,
wanted to increase the level of belonging, what are the tools or methods by which you would accomplish that?
yeah, excellent question, Ed. I think the first thing is to measure it. So that's why we designed the instrument, so that you can measure it and see where you are at, and whether you use something like what Vital does, which is a piece of software to help you measure it and then to deploy content to employees to help them take action, or you just design a simple survey and you go, do you feel you belong here, and send it out to your staff and see what you learn from it. There's that Peter Drucker quote, I think, that's like, what gets measured gets improved. And so I think I would start with measuring it in some way that's relevant to your values or your organization, its mission. Once you do that, to start somewhere, to start small. I think typically a lot of DEIB work gets log jammed and paralyzed by the possibility and and also the high stakes nature of the work. So I think starting with small programmatic efforts that help people feel they belong, it could be something like revisiting your onboarding program, talking to new hires, asking them, hey, you know, were there moments that made you really feel excited or that you belonged here? And then to work backwards and implement those in your program. It doesn't have to always be a grand programmatic gesture. It can be something as small as that, or it can be something as small as giving employees good coaching and ideas on what they can do, or reminding them of the many things they already do to build belonging and just helping them be more consistent, especially when you talk about mixed work environments. Sometimes the common things don't happen as organically. And so we'll talk about some of those examples as well, Ed. I'm going to segue into those. But I think the key is to start small, to start somewhere, and then to mostly inspire employees. The fastest way to drive cultural change, especially around belonging, is to empower employees. That's what my research taught me. At least that's what I think it's indicating to me. And I think I look at that as the best way for culture change to move forward, is to have leaders, of course, set an inspiring tone to help frame the work, but then to allow every person to see themselves in it and push that work forward, and to be resourced to do it, which is often the real challenge. How do you get that at the manager level, at the individual contributor employee level, the tools to talk about and change and affect their own belonging or for others? I think that's where, you know, rubber meets the road, and that's often what organizations struggle the most with. But programmatically, I think HR can do a lot, from anything in the talent management lifecycle, from language bias to just reviewing what's working already and expanding upon those best practices. There's a lot to be, one, already being done, but two, that can be done about belonging. That's a great question, though. And if there's something else that you've got there that you think, hey, can we talk more pointedly about that? I'd love to hear it. But I will segue into some ideas. Hopefully that will also help inspire some more conversation. And so, you know, what can you do to build belonging? I don't want to leave you here tonight without some practical ideas about how you can create belonging for yourself and for others. Some might say it's best to start with the oxygen mask rule, where you help yourself first and then you help people around you. That's okay. I respect that. It's true in many ways. Some people would say it's best to learn and experience by giving, and then by doing that, you're helping yourself be better understand how to receive. So not everybody's wired the same, and there's no wrong way to start. The key is to start somewhere individually, as much as we would want to as HR leaders organizationally. And a few things that are here I just wanted to quickly talk about that have been popular with Vital and our customers are these little nudges that honestly probably don't feel groundbreaking or something that if you sat down and said, well, what's one thing we could do about this? You wouldn't have thought of yourself, but I think that's kind of the point. Simple is good, simple is sustainable, simple is inclusive. And you know, we don't do enough simple stuff and remind ourselves to kind of do that. And this is the goal of what we've been trying to do with Vital. But a few ideas, you know, whether it's advocating for your team. One that's been really popular is taking the shout out challenge. It seems really corny, and I have a lot of people go, this seems so corny. You really don't do this, do you? And we've had people do this and come back and say this was transformational for their relationships with people. Just putting 5 minutes on a calendar and forcing themselves to write a quick note of recognition or drop a quick thought of recognition into a meeting, and then to reflect on how that affected their relationships. But that wasn't even the most powerful part we've heard. What we've heard back from most people about it is not that, oh, well, our relationship's better. Yeah, I flattered somebody a lot. I recognized them a lot. Of course, our relationship's better. What they didn't expect was how much more recognition it got them. That the more they focused on helping other people feel seen, the more those people saw them in the process. And that's been one of the really cool things about a silly little challenge like this, is that it shows you the power of that. And then if that becomes your own ritual or habit, you don't need the prompt as much anymore, except occasionally to remind you that this is all possible. But that's the goal, is to just get into these little habits that make a huge difference for one another. Inviting new opinions, again, right? Just going out there and inspiring curiosity in others, right? This is another one that people really has resonated with people. So inviting others into your process, advocating for others, recognizing others, those are incredible ways that you can build belonging. You don't have to wait for an HR program to do it. You can design HR programs where the idea is to push people into these behaviors. That's great. Whether that's a recognition platform or a spot bonus program or a peer recognition platform, that's great. It's all aligned to the idea of getting people to be intentional about recognizing others, helping them feel more accepted, connecting people together. For yourself, you know, there's, again, it's simple, it's common sense sort of, but you know, a lot of people don't take time to invest in themselves in the everyday busyness of work. Thinking about your own authentic brand. How do you want to articulate yourself as a professional? How do you find that language and share it with people and then get feedback on that? This is something that a lot of us don't take time to do, but can have a huge difference in how other people perceive us. This first starts with how do we perceive ourselves. The second one there, celebrating your own wins. There's a lot of lack of self-love out there. A lot of people don't celebrate their big wins. They don't take time to appreciate their own success. And if you don't do that, it's hard for other people to do it as much as well. And then lastly, you know, don't feel like you're alone out there. Grow your network of experts. Any goal you have upcoming, reach out to a coworker or somebody that you can help you think that can accelerate your work. And so these are just little ideas. You know, I make a living off basically selling a technology platform that pushes a lot of ideas and goals like this to employees so that they can take control of creating belonging and test what works for them and find those moments and create those sort of breakthrough moments for others. But you can do something. I think that's the big thing I wanted to make sure you saw in these ideas, and hopefully you'll grab one of these ideas either right now or off the slides, and you're adding this to your calendars to try it out and see how it works for you. But take those small steps yourself while you think about the bigger things you can do that are HR driven. I don't think we have time. I'll come back to it if we did, but this is the discussion we'd have where I'd want to hear from all you, and maybe you can drop your ideas in the chat while we do questions and answers so we can dual processes at the same time. But the quick discussion questions I want to prompt you all with is, you know, when did you begin to feel accepted at work? What moments and experiences drove that feeling? And start with that type of introspection and then start asking other people the questions. Be curious. Talk to your counterparts. When you're talking with an employee, maybe you're just chatting and catching up. Say, hey, you know, one thing I'm working on is belonging here. I want to make sure people feel belonging. Can you talk to me about, you know, some moments for you that have been really helped you know you belonged here, that you felt accepted here? Recognition. What's your favorite example of recognition you've experienced or observed? Go and collect that feedback point from a lot of different people. And remember, the biggest and one of the best questions you can ask everybody you meet is, how do you like to be appreciated and recognized? We often think that recognition feels good, and we, you know, however we would like it for ourselves. We think, well, who wouldn't like to be praised publicly, or who wouldn't like to, receive something in a social platform? But often we don't ask, you know, hey, what is your preference? Do you like quiet recognition? Do you like a mix of positive and constructive feedback at once? Do you like to have those two things separated? Just by learning about people and being curious about them, we can recognize people better. And I think that's another really important thing about recognition, is that we don't just kind of cookie cutter recognize people in the way we like. We should try to take it to the next level and think about what they like. And then lastly, what helps you feel connected to other people? Not everybody's the same. Not everybody wants a friend at work. Some people want to have just really cordial and clearly boundaried professional relationships, but to them, that's a supportive bond that they can count on. It's not complicated. Some people need friends at work or to feel friendship at work. So, you know, I think it's important you start by understanding what helps you feel connected, and again, asking those questions to the people around you. So as much as this is a discussion for you to have and for you to share in the chat, you know, these are also prompts for you as HR leaders to ask the people you work with, and start to gather your own data set and what drives belonging in your organization. And I'll look in the chat to see if there are ideas coming through. Yeah, they could. If you're interested, Diana, in learning how to measure belonging at work, I'll gladly share my methodology with you. So just anybody here who wants to see the survey or Vital in more detail and see how we measure belonging, I'd be glad to show you, help you have some questions, inspire you. I'm a big open source person. I really think, you know, the more anybody who wants to take the time to be curious and ask about belonging and do something about it, let's not put barriers up. It's hard enough with everything else going on as it is. So yeah, absolutely, Diana, if you'd like that. Yeah, and then Ed, I love your suggestion in the chat, right? Assigning a mentor or a buddy. Yeah, that's a great idea. I think you know, when you're onboarding that's massive for your own belonging, but also as you're progressing in your career, being a mentor, right, is another way to find belonging in a new way. As somebody that people might look up to, or that might support others. It might treat for a person represent a new level of belonging. Ed, what was your thought there?
Well, and from the materials in 520 in talent management, I think you teach that one too, don't you, George?
I do 525 total rewards, but I'm familiar with the course.
Okay, well, anyway, in 520, one of the readings talks about onboarding and assimilation. And the readings certainly correlate with my own experience, and that is to the extent that somebody is assigned as a mentor or a buddy, and they're not the same thing. I don't mean to use them interchangeably, but to the extent that the employer is very proactive, particularly early on in those first few days, few weeks of employment, and you can really accelerate that assimilation process. The research indicates that turnover is materially affected a year and 2 years out. And so one obvious way is to make certain right at the outset that someone feels legitimately welcomed and proactively brought into the organization. So anyway.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there, Ed. And I think, in my research, what I found was, that acceptance is that piece to really press upon early. That what we, and we kind of needed to do some interviews to deep dive that nuance a little bit more than the survey could tell us. But, the idea that I walked away with is that recognition early on feels very shallow because it's predicated on a still forming degree of understanding of one's acceptance in place, right? I mean, we're a little bit hesitant to believe that within a week we're going to be fully accepted for exactly who we are. We're going through our own process of figuring out what version of me is going to be the most successful here. And that's why, working that acceptance, those acceptance behaviors and practices early on in onboarding, and then transitioning those quickly from, yes, in the first 30, 60, 90 days, we really, want to make sure you do feel a strong degree of acceptance and you can start to feel trust with your coworkers and colleagues. The recognition and the connections are much more meaningful when they're predicated on that. So I completely agree, Ed. And I think the first 90 days, the first year are critical. And then it's not just, once you're there, you kind of go through this non-linear process where then you get your first promotion. Oh, your belonging all of a sudden is something that is less established once more. And you've got to reestablish it in a new light, in a new way with a new group of peers. And so, this is why that investment can never stop, but it's certainly really critical early on. And you're completely right. Thank you for that. Well, I know we're coming up on 3 minutes, so a couple of quick thoughts, and then I'll open it up to any final questions and comments from the HRMA group. What can you do to build belonging? A couple of thoughts I hope inspire you along your own journeys, no matter where you are, whether you're there now, you feel great belonging, you're somewhere in between, you've never felt belonging. Remember that you have the power to drive change, so take the risk. You can affect the culture you're in. You can affect the degree of belonging you feel and the degree of belonging that others feel. And you can start alone. It's okay to start alone. It sounds a little counterintuitive, right? I want to belong with other people, but I'm starting at it alone. But don't let the fact that you may not belong or not sure of your own belonging stop you from trying. And you can start with practices that are from within, from feeling belonging and caring for yourself, but don't stay at it alone, right? Find people who can support you along the journey, even if they're outside of the company, they're in the industry, or vice versa. Try to find groups and communities like this one that will support you along the way, because it's a journey and it's full of peril as much as it is full of joy and success. And you want to have people there with you for both of those types of moments. Understand what makes you feel you belong and then express yourself. I've provided an ARC model and some language, but for you, it may be something totally different. For you, belonging may be singularly about this type of moment. But whatever it is, express yourself. Don't hide it. Don't lock it up. Talk about what helps you feel belong. Let people know so that they can also be part of that journey for you and support you. And then lastly, stay on the journey, right? Your values are your compass. Belonging matters, but nothing is more important than being able to live the values that help you, feel like you're a productive and successful member of society or an organization, and that where you could sleep at night. So, what I mean is, don't make huge sacrifices to feel you belong, and don't feel like, there's if you're feeling weird about trying to belong in an environment that doesn't align with your values. It's okay. It's okay to say, and maybe I don't belong here and I want to try to find a different space. That's not failure. It's not anything other than trying to be on a journey to find where you really do feel belonging is sustainable and right for you. So let me just stop there and say again, thank you. Really, just really fun to be here and to take up your time. I know we're coming to an end, and I'm glad to stay after in case anyone wants to chat or ask questions. But certainly, I'll take any questions now, and if you can't stay, I completely understand and wish you a wonderful evening. But any questions as we close out?
This is Karen. I was going to say thank you so much. This was wonderful, and I think an excellent topic. And I think, to me, it's just not covered enough, I think. But curious, such a great topic. What was the catalyst for you to start this, down this journey of talking about belonging and educating on that?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking it, Karen. And I would say, a couple of catalysts. One, as a consultant, it's something I saw a lot of people and organizations get stuck on, that they were working on engagement, building HR programs like performance management, like everything we've seen, talent culture programs to try to retain and engage people. And there was a lot that was falling flat, and I wasn't sure what it was. And the dialogue around belonging was one that really resonated with me as a place. And I've always been kind of this, I've always been in this space. I don't know why my camera got so blurry. I apologize. But, I've been in this space where I often find myself as an ombuds person or middle person in organizations in my life. And I found something wonderful about trying to create common ground in community. And so I think, through my own experiences being mixed race, growing up overseas, I've struggled with belonging a lot personally. And it kind of took me a while to put those two things together. My own personal journey into HR, not finding belonging in my career until I found HR, or, until I was lucky enough to get into this profession. And then, from there, I was in a position where, we saw this issue with clients, and I was curious. I had a research question, and we took it from there. And then a year of research later and working on a company, you find yourself kind of committing yourself wholly to this issue. But it was both personal and professional, I would say. And I'm still on it. I'm still figuring it out. I'm still trying to figure out what my voice in it is. I'm just lucky, and I feel really fortunate I get to have one at all.
Well, thank you. It is really an excellent topic, and I think so many people can really learn from this. Lots of organizations. I like the concept of what you and Professor Johnson were talking about, is the whole onboarding concept, right at the very beginning, bringing people in to help them to feel welcomed, truly welcomed, not just the superficial thing, rah kind of thing, but to truly have them welcomed. And I was reading something this weekend that was talking about surveys and so forth, and we're always doing engagement surveys, satisfaction surveys. When we do that, maybe your midterm, after you've been with the organization for a while. And I think sometimes we forget about asking, how was your onboarding process? And even doing a survey with that. Did you get a mentor? Did you get a buddy or something like that? Or were you just shown to the restroom and then that's it, and your desk, and have a nice day, sort of thing. So, and then they're wondering why you're leaving in 6 months, because, this was not the job for me. So I like that concept of bringing someone on board and really welcoming them at the beginning.
Yeah, it's a great point you bring up, Karen, which is that I would say, the last 2 years have created a lot of visibility and criticism of performative actions in work. Whether that's performative, statements of support for XYZ cause, whether that's greater diversity, greater inclusion, or just sort of, signaling support for whatever topic it may be, but then not really following through. I think the survey is the original performative action of employers. It's where, oh, well, we're going to ask you to share your voice, and then we're not going to do something about it, or it's going to be behind a function box you'll never see. And I think the future of this and the climate we're in is how can you create and listen to your employees, whether it's survey or whatever other mechanisms you're using, but then create feedback loops that are much faster than we'll filter it through, our own lens of expertise. And in the meantime, you wait for us to interpret this data. I think the more we can empower people with information about what's going on and then the tools to do something about it, the more we can architect the employee journey instead of trying to, scaffold it around a lot of heavier programs. Those things are still great. I'm always going to believe in HR programs, but you want that drumbeat to be there. You want everybody to wake up every day in an org and say, I'm going to do something intentional about creating belonging for other people. If that's not there, all the nice to have programs sort of fall into the, oops, I'll do it next week category, as does most people's follow up to the details of employee engagement surveys. So I appreciate your point there. I think we've all got to do more to empower the people around us, the managers, the employees without managerial responsibilities, to say that they can see themselves in driving real change.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Well, I know we're over, so let me once again say thank you, everybody, for joining tonight, and HRMA for having me here. It's been awesome. If you watch the recording and you're still here, thank you for watching this. I'm really impressed. Ed, thank you for being here. But it's just it's a real joy to talk about belonging. As many of you know, in HR, it's hard to talk about our work at cocktail parties. So when you find a group of any people, even one person that wants to talk about it with you, it's a good day. So thank you all so much, and just again, HRMA for having us here. I encourage anybody watching this or that's here, if you're not already part of HRMA, to support them, the work they're doing to build community and belonging for all of us. It's admirable, it's worthy, and it's making a huge difference for our USC community. So I'm extremely proud of the HRMA's work.